Aladdin's Lamp is a card with some interesting history. So let's talk about this curiosity of a card. Aladdin's Lamp is an artifact that costs 55 mana?
5 plus 5 is 50, 50, 50, 55.
No, joking aside, it costs 10 mana, which is still an obscene amount of mana. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but first let's see what the card does. You can pay X mana and tap Aladdin's Lamp, and instead of drawing the next card you would draw, you dig through the top X cards in your library, select one, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. That effect is actually kind of interesting. It's not really mana efficient, even if you get it into play, but it is a pretty powerful effect. But what this card does is probably the least interesting part to talk about, so let's go back to the mana cost for a minute. The 5/5 mana cost only appears in the first printing of this card in Arabian Nights. It was reprinted into Revised with the correct mana cost. The reason this happened is because of a physical limitation. I don't know the exact specifics of whatever design tools they were using, but at the time it was physically impossible to fit two numbers into the generic mana cost bubble, and the solution that they opted for was to use two generic mana cost symbols and make them both 5. I guess this is sort of an elegant solution since you add together all the mana pips in a cost anyway, but it is very weird to look at, and I would say it's reasonable to be confused by this. Especially when the internet isn't nearly as easy to access, and even if you could, you'd likely just find other opinions. It's not like Scryfall existed, you know? Now, the thing I find most confusing about this solution is that they could have just made it cost 9 mana, and it would have affected almost nothing about the game in any regard at all. But that opinion does have the benefit of retrospect. This does seem like a pretty powerful effect, so I can understand the hesitation to make this cost a low amount, but it's still so wildly above cost that I find it hard to understand the thought process. In fact, I'm not even sure this card has ever actually been in play with any sort of real game that was played without the goal of casting this just to say that you did. So if you ever actually tried to play this card, please let me know how the card did, and if you did it because it was a ridiculous notion, or if you thought it was good. I'm really interested. No shade, nobody knew what was going on back then, so it's not like I'll think you're stupid. I'm just curious if anyone actually believed the hype. But I don't have the experience playing with this card, and there aren't really any other cards that are similar enough that I could just fall back onto tangential experience to even take a guess at what this thing plays like. And to be honest, I don't think this card would be that good at 1 mana, but it would at least be playable, and I could be wrong about that. It would also be really funny to use Tinker to get this into play, before Game 3 is almost over, but if you're allowed to play Tinker, you probably have better options. This card is really funny, but I do think it's important to remember the context of the time when we judge this card. The game was so new. It's hard to point and laugh at this card because they didn't have the benefit of millions of players spamming games trying to break it on a digital client. Data was far less available, and people didn't have the fundamental understandings of card games because those fundamentals were still being explored and learned. It's not like people were bad at games, they just didn't have the experience to fall back on. And that's what makes Aladdin's Lamp so interesting to me. It's so transparently bad that it's hard to bring myself to a mindset where this seems like a good idea. But I do appreciate the discipline of aiming low with cards where the effect has a lot of potential to lower variance. They pretty much aimed straight at the floor with Aladdin's Lamp, but it's still cool that they didn't, just make this super busted. Now, there are some combos you can do with Aladdin's Lamp. Kind of. But I use that term lightly. And it should be noted that any combo that uses Aladdin's Lamp is most likely just better without Aladdin's Lamp. You can, for example, you can use Power Artifact with Grim Monolith, or Basalt Monolith, I guess, to make infinite mana, which you could then use to cast Aladdin's Lamp, then use Aladdin's Lamp like a Demonic Tutor, which, yeah, sure, that's kind of funny. Still, being good when you have infinite mana isn't like the highest praise in the world. But this card does kind of function like a second or like fifth version of your win condition in that circumstance, so I guess that's pretty okay. You could also use copper gnomes to get this into play if you wanted for some reason. But if you're gonna do that, you could just like tinker for it. But I guess copper gnomes is like way more likely to be legal. And while I'm mentioning dumb shit, if you manage to get this in play and have a Titania song in play, then this is a 10-10 with no abilities. And that's kind of good, I guess. Aladdin's Lamp is really funny to me, and I think if you just look at this card as a game piece instead of as an interesting and important step in the design of the game, you're selling the card a little short. And as always, I'm interested to hear what you dudes think of Aladdin's Lamp. But that's really all I have to say on this bad boy, so let's talk about the art and get on with our day. Aladdin's Lamp was illustrated by Mark Teaton, and I really like this art. I'm a big Teaton fan, and this one I think does a great job of being pretty simple yet still getting the point across. I especially like how his technique gives the lamp a really rough-hewn kind of look, and I think that really subtly helps with the flavor. I also like the blues and greens in the background. Like, it's a simple background, but I think it does the job well. The Arabic script above the lamp reads danger. It's apparently slightly misdrawn. This is the only art for Aladdin's Lamp, though. It was reprinted into Revised and 4th edition, but it had the same art, and after that they stopped bothering printing this. And yeah, that's all I really have for Aladdin's Lamp. So if you have any insights, I would love to hear them in the comments. Oh yeah, and speaking of comments, something changed in how YouTube gives me notifications. It used to just give me notifications when like somebody replied to something I said, or if I was like in a conversation chain. But now it gives me a notification for literally every fucking comment I get. And it's been fucking impossible to keep track of conversations. So if I've stopped replying to a conversation, that's probably why, and I'm sorry about that. I briefly looked at my settings to try and change this, but I didn't really have too much time to dedicate it, and when I looked through the notification settings, it didn't really look like there was a solution, but maybe I'll get it fixed. Still, having like more comments than time to dig through all those comments is not the worst problem to have, and I genuinely appreciate everyone that takes the time to engage in the discussions. It's really refreshing and cool to see people having independent conversations about these cards in the comments. Kind of feels like a forum of sorts, and that's really fucking cool. So thank you everyone for contributing, it means the world to me. Oh yeah, and if you got this reference, that video is 19 years old and you're a fucking dinosaur. But with that said, all I have left to say is that you can like the video if you liked it, and you are welcome to subscribe if you give a shit, but either way, I hope you have a magical day. Thank you for watching.